Getting started. Welcome to this module on strategic planning. Organizations use RBM most often when developing strategic plans, either for the entire organization, for country operations, or specific programs. This module discusses how UNICEF prioritizes issues for action and how strategic planning is essential to achieving results. On completion of this module, you will be able to answer the following 5 questions. What is strategic planning and why is it important? How does UNICEF prioritize actions that promote child rights and address deprivations? What is a theory of change and how does it support program design? How does UNICEF develop a strategic plan with a results framework? Explanations and examples will be given through the media of the case study, which takes place in the fictional country of Tasmania. Lesson 1. What is strategic planning? A disciplined approach to develop a multi-year vision of what results to achieve and how they will be achieved. In essence, creating a strategic plan comprises 3 steps. Firstly, you need to understand the situation of children in a country. This requires that you look at the situation of children in the country to understand the issues and problems affecting them and who is most affected. It means analysing and understanding the causes of the problems. We'll look at this in Lesson 2. Next, you need to plan what you are going to do to address the problems identified. The focus here is on choice. Since we only have limited resources, we need to have a method for prioritising what we do. We will look at this in Lesson 3. Finally, once you have decided who is most affected by a problem and why, and what causes or parts of the problem you will focus on, then comes the next step of developing a plan to change the situation. Putting down on paper how you are actually going to address the problem and make change happen. This will be discussed in Lesson 4. A strategic plan sets out a multi-year vision towards realizing the rights of children and reducing inequities through the achievement of specific outcomes. The process of strategic planning is about how that will be done, with whom, and how progress will be measured. Strategic planning is important because it provides direction on how UNICEF, at any given time and place, will organize itself to achieve results for children. The development of strategic plans is guided by the organization's mission and values. Human rights principles, gender equality, and environmental sustainability guide the development of strategic plans for UN agencies. Internationally agreed goals and principles also guide strategic planning for results at the global level, the organizational or corporate level, and at country or national level. Country-level strategic plans are relevant to strategic planning processes with governments, other UN agencies, civil society organizations, and other development partners to develop results-focused programs to improve outcomes for all children. Click on each blue button to see examples. Examples of global frameworks guiding formulation of strategic plans. Internationally agreed development goals. Sustainable development goals. Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD Programme of Action. Human Rights Frameworks. Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC. Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Examples of global strategies and plans of development organizations. Strategic plans. UNICEF, UNFPA, UNDP, WFP. WHO General Programme of Work Global Health Agenda, 2006 to 2015. Strategy 2020, the long-term strategic framework of the Asian Development Bank, 2008 to 2020. African Development Bank Strategy for 2013 to 2022. Examples of country-level strategic plans. National plans, National Development Plan. Poverty reduction plans, Education Sector Plan, National Health Strategy. UN Interagency Plans, United Nations Development Framework, United Nations Partnership Framework. Strategic Response Plans for Humanitarian Situations, Emergencies. Country Plans of UN, Multilateral Agencies. Country Programme Documents, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNDP, WFP. Country Cooperation Strategy, PAHO, WHO. Country Partnership Strategy, Asian Development Bank. Country Partnership Framework, World Bank. Lesson 2. Understanding the situation. For UNICEF, strategic planning begins with an understanding of what is happening with children in a country and why. By developing and reviewing causality, we are able to understand which children's rights are not being met and why. We get to understand who is deprived so that we can organize ourselves to change the situation. Understanding the situation requires 3 questions to be asked. Click on each headline to learn more about each question. What deprivations do children face? When the rights contained in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, are not met, children are deprived of their right. Available data and analysis enable us to determine the scale of deprivations and unfulfilled rights. Why is this situation happening? Causality, or the causal analysis, enables us to understand in more detail what the immediate, underlying and structural causes are of a particular situation. Knowing this enables us to address the main causes of a problem and not just its symptoms. Who is most affected? To understand the causes of deprivations, we first need to know who are the most deprived and where are they. Who is vulnerable and who will be most affected by natural disasters, epidemics, conflict and other stresses. In order to analyse what non-fulfilled rights are, the Convention on the Rights of the Child can be thought of as a checklist of what should be fulfilled, as well as other frameworks that exist. This allows us to have a human rights-based approach to programming. Data and analysis at the country level, including Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey, MIX, Demographic Health Survey, DHS, and other sector-specific analyses, help to tell us whose rights are not being met. UNICEF uses such information as a basis for developing a causal analysis, which will then help to tailor strategic responses. Have a look at this statement. Generally, is it true? UNICEF's mission is to realize the rights of every child. Take a moment to think about this. Done? Then let's proceed. UNICEF's mission is to advance the rights of every child, with a special focus on the most disadvantaged or deprived groups. This is UNICEF's equity focus. The situation analysis looks at overlapping deprivations. For example, a school-aged child suffering from malnutrition will have difficulty learning and may drop out of school and be vulnerable to child labour. We call this multiple overlapping deprivation. Another factor that you need to consider is disaggregation, which looks at the component parts that make up the average. Average figures may hide or mask inequalities. This is why disaggregated data is important to tell us who is most affected by inequalities and where they are located geographically. For example, children in country X receive between 6 and 7 years of education. However, poor rural girls in region Y have less than 1 year of education, while the average education for urban rich boys is 10 years. So UNICEF will try and focus on the most disadvantaged group, the poor rural girls. To understand the actual cause of a deprivation, we use the logic of always asking why. We start by identifying the key deprivation, which you already know is the negative outcome, a right not respected, protected or realized. You then ask, why is it happening? What are the immediate causes of this situation? These are the nearest and most direct causes, the most obvious ones. Continuously asking why should lead you to the underlying causes of the deprivation. These might be shortfalls in social services, lack of access, or harmful beliefs and practices. When looking at the underlying causes of the deprivation, you ask again, why is the situation happening, which should lead you to identify one or more structural causes. These might be the nature of social organisation, lack of policies, inequitable distribution of resources, and problems with governance. There could be deep-seated political or cultural reasons. These structural causes are very important to understand. For example, if the structural cause of a low education level in one region is due to local and endemic corruption, we may not be able to change the situation. So, unless we understand the structural causes of deprivation, UNICEF might just be wasting limited money and resources, as any change we create will not address the real cause. This is a fundamental area that you need to understand. So here is an example that pulls all this together, looking at the causes of deprivation in the fictional country of Tasmania. Click on each box in the order of the numbering to learn more. Deprivation or problem statement. 60% of children complete primary education, and only 27% of those meet the expected learning standard. This is a deprivation for the 40% of children who do not complete primary education, and for all those who do not meet expected learning standards. Consequences. Children do not acquire minimum competencies at school for life or work. Out-of-school children are at a higher risk of early marriage and exploitation. Immediate causes. Parents are unable to meet schooling costs. Children are too hungry to learn in areas hard hit by food crisis. Teachers are absent, and their teaching styles are not adapted to the needs of children. Underlying causes. Bursaries for poorer students are insufficient. Absence of school feeding programs. Insufficient supervision and oversight of teachers. Teachers inadequately trained in early grade teaching. Structural causes. Inadequate budgets for primary education. Weak government accountability structures, coordination between central and local levels, and no accountability to parents or communities. Teachers not getting sufficient remuneration and incentives. So, here you can see this represented again, but in this case as an entire matrix. Just to check that you understand two of the main principles to understanding a situation, drag and drop each one of these descriptions into the correct box. Match the description to the appropriate box. Drag and drop the levels of causality into their correct boxes.
That brings us to the end of our second lesson, where we've looked at answering the questions, what is the situation of children, which children and women are most deprived, and why. We have introduced the notion of rights that are not being met as deprivations. We have briefly covered casualty analysis, an approach that allows you to understand why the deprivation is happening. Always remember that you should look at the questions and answers through the lens of human rights, gender equality, and vulnerability to disaster risks. In the next lesson, we'll look at how you and UNICEF should choose what it is we should actually focus on.
Lesson 3. How do we choose and prioritise? Unfortunately, we cannot do everything we'd like to do. Given limited resources, UNICEF needs to make decisions for interventions on priority areas. UNICEF does not work on its own. We work with governments and other partners. One of the first things we need to find out is what the government and partners are doing. For example, in order to assist with an identified health deprivation, we might need to work within a national health strategy that has already been defined by the government with the support of other development partners. We go through a prioritization process to help us make decisions on what interventions we will support. We can put 5 filters through a prioritization funnel to determine UNICEF's comparative advantage are areas of focus. Central to prioritization is the idea of UNICEF's comparative advantage. What this means is having the mandate, resources and capacity to act effectively. There needs to be a reason or a set of reasons why UNICEF should be involved in responding to a situation, as opposed to another organisation or group of organisations. For example, if a deprivation was identified to exist because of bad traffic infrastructure, we might not get involved immediately, because we do not build roads, national governments do, in conjunction with other partners.
So what is UNICEF's comparative advantage in the education sector in Tasmania?
Well, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and our strategic plan give us the global mandate. We have the expertise to address deprivations in education based on our experience in the country. UNICEF has worked extensively with the Ministry of Education to develop the National Education Sector Plan in Tasmania. We work with the group of education actors, donors, NGOs, civil society organizations, CSOs, and academia to advocate for education for all. UNICEF has also taken the lead in promoting and certifying over 300 child-friendly schools.
The 5 filters are a way to reach a decision on areas of focus for UNICEF action. Click on each filter for more information. Criticality of national challenges and inequities. Evidence-based analysis of the persistence, severity and scope of deprivations and consequences for affected population groups. Consideration of multiple impacts of overlapping deprivations. Consideration of risks and disasters. Mandate to act on a particular problem. Defined by the mission statement and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, the Strategic Plan and Core Commitments for Children in Humanitarian Action, CCC, or Gender Action Plan, GAP, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, draws from global and sectoral priorities such as Sustainable Development Goals, Global Partnership for Education, etc. Actors working in the same field. Knowledge of the strengths and weaknesses of partners and key actors, their interests, programmatic and geographic areas of action. A partner mapping, stakeholder strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, SWOT analyses, will support determination of opportunities, strategic partnerships and the choice not to intervene in some areas based on the comparative advantage of other actors. Capacity and position to act. This involves 4 main areas: having the financial, human resources, technological and organizational operational capacity and structure to act. Considering value for money and efficiencies. Being positioned to act better than others, having a track record in an area. Being able to consider and address risks adequately. Applying lessons learned. Knowledge of program delivery from evaluations, lessons learned exercises. Evidence of approaches that have worked in addressing bottlenecks and barriers to outcomes, and tried and tested interventions. Knowledge of what has worked elsewhere that provides strong impact, supported by UNICEF and/or other institutions. Given that we have these 5 filters, let's look at how each one was represented in the Tasmania example. Click on each box to learn more. Criticality of national challenges and inequities. UNICEF Country Office supported the Government of Tasmania in carrying out a comprehensive education sector analysis in 2013. The analysis revealed that, despite increases in enrolment in recent years, primary completion rates remained low at only 60%, and less than a third of primary school completers were reaching the minimum learning standards. Tasmania's performance in reading and mathematics was among the lowest in the latest Regional Student Assessment Survey of 6th grade students. In addition, 3rd grade reading tests showed that, by the end of that grade, only 32% of children could read a short paragraph. High teacher absenteeism and low-quality teaching practices, particularly in the northeast and southern regions. Mandate to act on a particular problem. UNICEF's mandate to act on the identified problems in primary education in Tasmania derives from UNICEF's mission statement that calls for an expansion of development opportunities for children to reach their full potential. Article 28 of the CRC, Right to Education. UNICEF's strategic plan, improved learning outcomes and equitable and inclusive education. Global Partnership for Education, GPE, ensuring a quality education for girls and boys through improved sector plans. Out-of-School Children Initiative, improving collection and analysis of information about out-of-school children to promote inclusion and attendance. Actors working in the same field. Following a partner mapping of actors in the education sector, several donors were identified, all supporting advocacy and technical assistance for primary education. However, only the Junganese Cooperation Agency, JUCA, is operating in several provinces besides the government, with teacher training and provision of education supplies. UNICEF will need to seek complementarities with JUCA. Some CSO partners will support community-based action. Capacity and position to act. UNICEF has a strong track record in primary education in Tasmania. For instance, the Child Friendly Schools initiative, which focuses on improving learning environments, the provision of quality teaching methods and teacher support, has improved retention rates and learning achievement in the past. The Government of Tasmania relies on UNICEF's support to expand the programme across the entire country through the National Education Plan. Applying lessons learned. An evaluation conducted during the course of the 2010-2014 Programme of Cooperation demonstrated the importance of community involvement in the success of the Child Friendly School initiative and the results this produced on learning outcomes. Future programming will need to factor in this lesson. Having used the 5 filters to have a sense of UNICEF's role, you will then be able to use the prioritisation funnel to determine in what area UNICEF should focus. As you take each of the areas 1 to 5 in order, your focus will get ever sharper, and eventually you will be able to decide which are the priority issues that UNICEF should address.
That brings us to the end of our third section, where you have looked at how to choose and prioritise what to do. The first important point is to realise that we cannot do everything that we would like to do, as we have limited resources. We have looked at how we decide if we are the best organisation to actually get involved. Finally, we looked at ways of choosing which interventions to support. It is important to realise that these processes can be used at several levels, planning for whole country programmes, or for specific interventions within a particular programme. In the fourth and final chapter, we'll look at how you will actually plan to do your chosen intervention or interventions.
Lesson 4. Programme Design. How do we design a programme to adequately respond to the problem we have decided to work on? What must we have in place to make change happen? A theory of change presents UNICEF's broad vision of what results will be achieved and how one level of results, such as outputs, contributes to achieving another level of results, outcomes. In essence, a theory of change presents an answer to the question, how do we obtain the change we would like? It is a structured thinking process that allows groups to turn their theories about what needs to change and why into a causal pathway. Let's take a look at the 6 components of a TOC. Firstly, you need to define the results that you want to achieve. You will remember this image from Module 2, and you will remember the definitions. These are the 3 levels of the results chain that you need to plan. Your results will need to be written using the SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You will learn more about this in Module 5. You need to constantly use the if-then logic to move from one level to the other, ending up with a chain of results that constitute the structure for the design of your programme as reflected in your strategic planning document, such as your Country Programme Document, CPD, or your Programme Strategy Note. But keep in mind that lower-level results are not sufficient in themselves to achieve the higher level. Certain conditions must exist to enable movement from one level of results to another. So, by applying this logic, here is the results chain for the Tasmania case study. Take a few seconds to look at it in the light of what we have covered so far in this module, and then move on when you are ready. Having defined your results, you will need to define your strategies. Strategies provide broad direction of how results will be achieved, which directly influences the types of activities undertaken to achieve a result. Click on each of these boxes to answer some common questions about how you define your strategy. What strategies can we use to reach our results? The UNICEF Strategic Plan 2014 to 2017 lays out a list of implementation strategies that could be considered when designing your programme. Programme results can be achieved through capacity development, communication for development, evidence generation, policy dialogue and advocacy, knowledge management and exchange, partnerships, South-South and triangular cooperation, innovation, integration and cross-sectoral linkages, service delivery. How do we apply strategies to achieve results? There is generally more than one strategy that could be applied to achieve a result. A component of strategic planning is to select and apply the most appropriate strategies to achieve a specific result. How do we decide on the mix and balance of strategies for our program? The choice of strategy or strategies is based on the specific bottlenecks to be removed to achieve the intended results, the comparative impact of different strategies, practical considerations of effectiveness, affordability, and sustainability. We must also think of complementarity and synergies between strategies. As mentioned earlier, we have limited resources. That's why we have to plan strategically so we can use them optimally. Money and people are typical resources we consider when designing a program. Typically, our country programs last 5 years, so you need to consider what can we best do within that time frame to have the maximum benefit for the children that we help. Next, you will need to identify your assumptions and risks. Let's start with the assumptions. There is our current situation, and there are the results we want to achieve. Assumptions, then, are defined as the variables or factors which need to be in place for these results to be achieved. In developing a theory of change, one assumes that removing certain bottlenecks or producing certain outputs would lead to the achievement of planned outcomes, which in turn would bring about the desired results. Impact. Other assumptions that are made relate to the programming environment. Other partners will successfully implement their own plans. The national economy will improve as predicted. Donors will provide needed funding to UNICEF. For the TOC to be plausible, these assumptions must be based on experience, operations research, or other evidence. Here are the assumptions for the Tasmania case study. Take a few seconds to look at it in the light of what we have covered so far in this module, and then move on when you are ready. Next comes the concept of risk. Risks are defined as a potential event or occurrence that could adversely affect the achievement of a desired result. Examples of these could be natural disasters, conflict, or economic collapse, and if not considered, they could potentially derail, disrupt, or destroy your plan. Risks are identified and classified according to the likelihood of occurring and the consequence of occurring. UNICEF has an established methodology for assessing and addressing risks. Next comes the planning of your indicators. Indicators help you monitor your progress. As defined in Module 2 of this e-learning course, indicators are quantitative or qualitative factors or variables that provide a simple and reliable means to measure achievement, to reflect the changes connected to an intervention, or to help assess the performance of a development actor. Indicators are essential for intervention monitoring and evaluation, and you need indicators for every result. To be effective for charting progress toward a result, an indicator must have a logical relationship to the expected result, be measurable, can be quantitative or qualitative, and be measured at reasonable intervals. Click on the question marks to learn more. Baseline. The baseline is the status of the indicator at the beginning of an intervention. Without a baseline, we cannot tell if we are making progress. What are SMART indicators? Indicators have to be created using the SMART criteria. This means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You will learn more about them in Module 5. Target. The target is a status of the indicator which is planned to be achieved at the end of the intervention. Without a target, we cannot tell if we have achieved the result. Means of verification is the means through which the status of an indicator is determined. For example, existing information systems, survey, study, evaluation, etc. Without MOV, the achievement of the result cannot be assessed. Please note, MOVs need to be reliable, practical, and cost-efficient. Lastly comes feedback loops. In planning, there needs to be a coherence check results, resources, strategies, before finalizing the plan, and is the start of the feedback loop. Feedback loops to adjust plans will also happen during implementation. Feedback loops allow you to test and adjust the theory of change as conditions evolve. Economic crisis, natural disasters, conflict, instability, etc., or changes are anticipated. Feedback loops allow constant consideration of risks and assumptions, and allow you to break the linearity of the results chain. They are important as they allow for moments of review and adjustment. No project is ever static. Effective communication, strong relationships with stakeholders, and ongoing situation monitoring are key to effective feedback mechanisms needed to ensure the continuing relevance and adequacy of the programme's design. We've now looked at the 6 main components of a TOC. Before we proceed, are you ready for a quick knowledge check? Click the button to test your knowledge on TOC components. Just to check that you understand these components, which TOC components do these sentences belong to? Drag and drop the sentences on the right to the appropriate boxes. So now you understand the components that make up a TOC, which forms an essential part of strategic planning. How do you represent these in order to communicate the plan to other people? Take a moment to think about this. Done? Then let's proceed. The products of a theory of change are often presented as a combination of a short written document, which describes each of the elements of the theory of change and how they fit together, and a matrix that displays the results chain and the associated indicators. The matrix is known as a logical framework. The value of the theory of change lies as much in the process of its development than as in the final product, and thus final versions may differ considerably from the initial version. It uses the vertical and horizontal logic to support an assessment of the quality of the program's design, to support a quick assessment of the quality of the program design, vertical, and measurability, horizontal. The program results chain, outputs, outcomes, and impact, and critical assumptions constitute the vertical logic. The vertical logic tests the soundness of the results chain, that is, whether outputs will contribute to the desired outcomes and outcomes to the identified impact. For example, whether the actions listed under a particular output are sufficient to achieve the intended output result, and if the outputs listed under a particular outcome, including the outputs by other partners, be sufficient to achieve the planned outcome results. The program performance elements, indicators, means of verification, assumptions, and risks are referred to as the horizontal logic. The horizontal logic enables assessment of program performance. For example, if no measurable indicator can be found to assess progress against the planned results, the result will have to be reformulated. For example, strengthened capacity would need to be specified. For checking your understanding of the difference between horizontal and vertical logic, try and match up the concepts with the correct logic type. Drag each concept to the correct logic type. When you are finished, click Submit.
As strategic planning is an iterative process, once the program is designed, it is important to consider the elements that are likely to make the program amenable to evaluation, and hence to measurement and the demonstration of results. An evaluability assessment enables us to test the quality of the design of the program and whether it can be implemented and measured.
Before we proceed, do you have an idea of what an evaluability assessment does exactly? Take a moment to think about this. Done? Then let's proceed.
An evaluability assessment examines the extent to which a program can be evaluated, establishes at the program design phase the readiness of the program for an eventual evaluation, adds a quality assurance element to the program preparation, highlights data needs and sources and data gaps that need to be addressed. That brings us to the end of this lesson and this module on strategic planning. Before you can check your knowledge in the final quiz, let me give you a quick summary of what we've covered.
This module has discussed how strategic planning is essential to achieve results and how UNICEF prioritizes issues for action. You should now be able to define strategic planning and its importance to achieve results. Recognize how UNICEF prioritizes actions that promote child rights and addresses deprivations. Define a theory of change and how it supports program design. Address how UNICEF develops a strategic plan with a results framework, and define result-based budgeting.